Popeye, the game that should have been Donkey Kong. In today's discussion, we'll be taking a look at the Popeye video game from the arcade and its NES and Atari 2600 ports. So grab your spinach and a Wimpy burger, because we're going to look at the game that should have been Donkey Kong. Lots of us will know how the legend goes. Once upon a time, when the video game business was still young, Nintendo were still primarily a company that produced toys, playing cards, and all that other stuff that they were known for before they got into the video game business. But they saw that the world was taken by storm by the likes of Pong and eventually Space Invaders, and so Nintendo decided it was time to get into the video game business.
素晴らしいボールの変化、鮮やかな9色のカラーがゲームの種類によって変わります。
Nintendo, in their early days, released the TV color game systems. And these were simple Pong clones with either 6 or 15 or so games built in. In the arcades, Nintendo released their first arcade game in radar scope. And when this wasn't the hit that Nintendo had hoped for, they set about coming up with the next concept and hopefully their first major hit. Their big idea was to release a game based on Popeye the Sailor Man, the long-running cartoon series. But Nintendo couldn't secure the rights to Popeye, and so they ended up making a game with their own original characters. That game, of course, turned into Donkey Kong. And when you look at the game that Donkey Kong was, it's easy to see how this would have been the same thing, but with Popeye characters. Mario, of course, would have been Popeye, Donkey Kong would have been Bluto, and Pauline would have been Olive Oil. You can even look to Mario picking up the hammer and then being able to take on and defeat any of the bad guys, just as Popeye would pick up spinach and then have the strength that he has with his favourite can of vegetable mush to take on Bluto. Well, this is a case of a blessing in disguise for Nintendo, as not getting the rights to Popeye for the game that would become Donkey Kong couldn't have worked out better for them. Imagine how video games would be different today if Donkey Kong had been released as Popeye. You'd have to assume that the game would have still been a hit. The Popeye license would have got it some more attention if anything, and people would have then discovered that the gameplay, if it had remained the same, would have been awesome. So surely it would have still been a big success. I can't imagine that having Popeye attached to it would have lessened its success because Popeye was well known. I mean, I guess there is a chance that Donkey Kong as it was may owe some of its success to the big gorilla and the name Kong. Kong, of course, was a well-known name because of the movie King Kong. But truthfully, I don't think having the name Kong would have brought it too many more players compared to if it was a Popeye game. And maybe having the Popeye name would have been an advantage. But maybe not, as I'm not sure Popeye was at the height of its popularity then either. Certainly isn't now. But if the game had been Popeye, there would have been no creation of Donkey Kong, no Pauline, and especially no Jumpman, which I think everyone and their cousin knows is now known as Super Mario. So yeah, blessing in disguise. But whilst over the coming years Nintendo would put Mario into games left, right and centre, with him popping up in Wrecking Crew, Game Boy Tennis and acting as the referee for Punch-Out!, Nintendo was still up for getting the Popeye license when it was later granted to them. In 1982, Nintendo released Popeye, and whilst they could have just made a game exactly like Donkey Kong with the Popeye license slapped on, they instead made a game that was almost exactly like Donkey Kong, but worse in most ways, where they tried to change up the gameplay style. The differences between the two are only really a few, but they are significant. Instead of there being an end point to a level that you have to reach like on Donkey Kong, each of the stages has you tasked with collecting a number of things to finish the level. This includes musical notes and hearts that Olive Oil will send out to you as she either plays music for Popeye or just sends him some hearts out into the ether. I don't really understand the logic of that. Not that you can actually collect music notes in real life. They're a sound, or yeah, I don't know. The game starts with both Bluto and Popeye declaring their love for Olive. Whilst Bluto clearly gets down on one knee, Popeye just offers a flower and wasn't willing to put a ring on it. So clearly Olive Oil was just after a fling and not ready to settle down then. Olive then starts to throw out these love hearts, and on the first stage you'll have to run around and collect them whilst dodging Bluto, who is truthfully something of a pain in the butt. He's almost like the earliest version of Nemesis from Resident Evil, as he's an unkillable threat who you can only occasionally slow down, who is much larger than you and will stalk you around the level trying to punch you. This makes Bluto much more part of the action than Donkey Kong, who famously will throw barrels at you in the iconic first level of his game, and then just kinda sit there and do nothing in every other level. Play the game again if you don't believe me. Literally, Donkey Kong doesn't even throw the springs at you in that other level where they bounce towards you. They just bounce right past him. He doesn't do any of the lifting. Otherwise, the game is still kind of like Donkey Kong. It's like Nintendo were like, okay, we finally got the Popeye license. Let's not just make Donkey Kong again, but find the minimum number of ways to change up the style of gameplay. Both games take place on a single screen, as was the fashion at the time. Lots of games, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, and so on and so forth, would all take place just on a single non-scrolling screen, and then you'd go to the next stage, which would be another non-scrolling screen. That's fine, but just the way you go up and down ladders or stairs in this version and pick up items whilst avoiding baddies, it just really feels like Donkey Kong. The main difference really is that Bluto, unlike Donkey Kong, will run around the level after you, like I said. It's a shame really that this was wasted on the ultimately forgettable Popeye game, as if they'd taken this level design and made it Donkey Kong 2, you know, as an alternative or different game that they made with Donkey Kong Jr., this time Kong Strikes Back. It would have been quite a fun game. There are some old women who throw things at you on some levels. I'm not sure if this is a Popeye character or just a random woman. I like to imagine that she is Bluto's true love and that she is attacking Popeye to prove herself and her love to Bluto. Although stopping Popeye in theory would send Olive Oil right into Bluto's arms. So maybe my theory doesn't hold up there. The game also has cameos from Wimpy and Pee-wee. Wimpy is on a seesaw that will spring Popeye back to the start of the second level, and Pee-wee will help catch you. Another difference is that Popeye can't jump, whereas Mario actually could, because he was Jumpman. It was literally pretty much the only thing he could do. They saved the jumping for Jumpman, aka Mario, but Popeye can still go up and down stairs and climb ladders, but just no jumping. The good news is that you can find spinach on each level and then use this to get extra strength to knock Bluto as far down the level as possible. Once again, you can't actually kill him, you only knock him down and then he'll chase after you. There's also some enemy birds that you can knock away with a mighty punch, and you don't even need the spinach to be able to take care of the birds. It's just Bluto because, you know, he's much bigger. But you'll only knock him back down to the bottom of the stage for literally a couple of seconds, and then you are done with spinach. Truthfully, I think there should have been multiple cans of spinach for you to pick up at various points, just so that you have a little bit more of a fighting chance and it isn't always just a case of run away for the rest of the level. The game is okay, but it lacks the excitement of Donkey Kong. There are far too many things that you have to collect in each level, and like the hearts, they float down really slowly, so it just feels a bit tedious by the time you're said and done. The issue is that the gameplay to collect the things is just too samey. You'll just end up hovering around one area and collect the hearts or the musical notes as they float down, and you'll only really need to deviate from this if an enemy flies at you or throws something at you. I think once again this could have all been fixed if the things you need to collect would show up at random places around the level and only stay on screen for a limited time, and you'd have to chase around to pick them up. Because otherwise you're just hovering in one place and only dodging away anywhere different if there's an enemy in that exact spot. Now, I said that if things would randomly appear would have been good for the spinach, but thinking about it, it would have made the whole game better if it had been every collectible item. This would mean you'd have to learn your best ways to run around each level and not just have the whole thing being about dodging Bluto for a moment and then returning to the same spot. I do sometimes feel that there's a couple of design choices that were frustrating beyond this. There's usually one of the levels on each stage where you can run off the side of a screen and appear back on the opposite side of the screen, like in Pac-Man. I think there should have been one at the top and one at the bottom, or just one in the middle, because if you have to run all the way to the top just to go to the other side, it means you won't really use it if the hearts or notes that you're collecting are at the bottom of the screen. And if they do float all of the way down to the bottom of the screen, then you'll get some panic music and you have to get them really quick. Whichever version you're playing, you'll either get the woman throw what looks like bottles at you, just as Bluto will throw them at you as well, and he'll really throw a lot at you at a single time. And on the NES version, the women throw skulls at you, which is cool. That's a nice change for that version. And there are no women enemies on the Atari version that I played, and it's just random dots fly at you. On the Atari version, these are a little bit harder to punch out of the air, but it's quite easy on the other ones, thankfully. The third level sees Olive kidnapped by a vulture, and I had to question, why wasn't she kidnapped by Bluto? The third level takes place on a pirate ship by the looks of it, or it might just be a ship. I mean, Popeye is a sailor man after all, and on that one you have to collect the letters of the word help to build a ladder which will get you to the top of the level, where you'll finally be able to rescue Olive and beat the game. The game did get versions on a variety of platforms, including the NES and Atari 2600, which I've looked at in this video. These keep the same basic idea of what you do on the game, but aren't as hard as the arcade version. Not that the arcade version is particularly hard. Truthfully, this game is almost as good as Donkey Kong, but it isn't as good. And the ways in which it isn't as good make it go from being iconic like Donkey Kong to just, yeah, it's an okay game that isn't as good as Donkey Kong. It's probably that the game would be more fondly remembered if it had been another Donkey Kong game, but with the license of Popeye, it meant that it's been mostly lost to time. It's just amazing to think that if the original Donkey Kong had been the Popeye game, it would have probably disappeared into obscurity, as Nintendo would have been less likely to keep the license going. And as it is, the game that would come out as Popeye feels like a worse sequel to Donkey Kong in terms of gameplay, and as such, it's all but never been seen really ever again. So, what are your memories of the Popeye game? Did you play it in the arcade, or do you still have it for your Atari or Nintendo? Or perhaps another system it was ported to. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's going to wrap things up for this video. If you haven't done so already, please do me a favour and smash that subscribe button here on www.youtube.com/@Geek Battle Gaming. And as always, you can check out the written version of this discussion over at www.xstreamed.tv/gaming. And with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, and I'm off the air.